Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Real with Kacey Kasem, the podcast that goes behind the scenes of the fantasy football industry through interviews with some of the best in the business. On this episode, I had the honor of being joined by Marcas Grant, someone you may know from a little place called the National Football League, where he can be found on the NFL Fantasy Football Podcast and the NFL Fantasy Cheat Sheet. You might also know him from Fantasy Life or from the Blue Review on ESPN Radio Los Angeles, where he talks Dodgers. In our chat, we talked about how baseball was Marcus's number one sport as a kid, his college experience, calling in lineups and hand calculating stats, how he balances work and life, his experiences at the Fantasy Football Expo, the growth in the fantasy football community, what he wishes he knew when he first started in this industry, and a whole lot more. Please give Marcus a follow on Twitter at MarcusG. That's spelled MarcasG. You can follow me, Kacey Kasem, at @TheKaceyKasem, and the podcast at GetReal_pod. You can find my content at Rotoballer, Fantasy Six Pack, and South Harmon Fantasy Football. And don't forget to check out SundayDreamersClub.com for some really rad fantasy football inspired t-shirts. This podcast is a proud member of the DAP Network. And now, here's my conversation with Marcas Grant on Get Real with Kacey Kasem. Today's my first one. Yay, how exciting. All right. Well, we're going to get started right now with Marcas Grant, and we are going to find out all about his fantasy football journey. But starting off, I'm very excited to have you on the show. I would like to know the question I ask everybody at the beginning of this podcast, which is, when you were growing up, did you have a relationship with sports, and what kind of relationship was that?
Yeah, I very much did as a kid. I mean, my mother was never really interested in sports, but my dad was a big sports fan. And so I remember, as far back as I can remember, my dad watching sports and me sort of, starting to watch with him. I started playing youth soccer. I might have been 6 or 7 years old. Started playing Little League pretty much as early as I could, playing baseball there. And so I've always had a relationship with sports, always been a sports fan. My friends and I would play. We played two-hand touch football in the street. We played a lot of wiffle ball in the summer. It's funny, too, because we were as kids, we were very season-specific, right? In the fall and winter, we played two-hand touch football. In the spring and summer, we were baseball. We were wiffle ball. And if somebody dared suggest just on a random day in June, like, hey, man, let's play some football, like, there was adamant disagreement. Like, no, it is not football season. We are not playing football. I mean, like, we very much stuck to the seasons. But yeah, that was my life and my childhood growing up. Very much a sports fan. Was always a baseball fan. It was always my number one sport growing up as a kid. It's the one I played the most. It's the one I probably watched the most. But I was, as far back as I can remember, I have been a sports fan.
Did you have any favorite teams or players when you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the Bay Area in Northern California and was pretty much a fan of all the Bay Area teams except for the San Francisco Giants. But I was a 49ers fan. I kind of liked the Raiders. The Raiders left Oakland the first time when I was very, very young. I might have been, 4 years old, something like that, when they left. But I was a 49er fan because they were very good when I was a kid. It was the Montana, Steve Young, Jerry Rice years when they were winning Super Bowls all the time. I was a Golden State Warriors fan, which as a child was kind of tough. Like, now that I've become an adult, like, it's been a little bit more fun because they're good. But as a kid, it was tough being a Warriors fan, but I cheered for them. I was very much a Bay Area sports fan. My favorite athletes were all athletes that played for my teams. It was Jerry Rice. It was Ricky Henderson for the A's. It was Tim Hardaway for the Golden State Warriors. I remember, I think I was a freshman in college, I think, when the Warriors traded Tim Hardaway to the Miami Heat. And I had a Hardaway poster in my freshman dorm, and I wouldn't take it down. And my roommate's like, "Bro, you gotta get over this." I'm like, I can't let this go, man. This hurts too much. Those were all of my favorite athletes. I think my favorite athlete that didn't come from one of my regional teams I was a Marcus Allen fan when he was with the Los Angeles Raiders, in part because at that point in my life, when he was like a rookie or second year in the NFL, he was the first other person I had ever heard of in my life named Marcus. just as a kid, I'm like, wow, somebody else is named Marcus. This is amazing. And so I kind of started following him. And then it turned out that he actually was really, really good, good enough to be in the Hall of Fame. And so like I was a big fan of him. In fact, it's funny, I went to USC. He won the Heisman Trophy at USC, and he was back on campus when I was a student, autographing copies of his book. And I remember I skipped out on my work study job. I made up some excuse like I was going to go run errands, and instead I went to the bookstore and bought 2 copies of the book and stood in line to get him to autograph them, one for me and one for my dad. And I remember standing in this line and waiting and thinking, like, what am I going to say to him when I finally get to the front of the line, trying to come up with something, really deep. And I got to the front of the line. I was like, my name is also Marcus. Like, you idiot.
Whoops.
Right, exactly. But he was super gracious, super nice. He autographed the 2 books. I felt like a heel, but I went on my way. And I think I still have the book somewhere. But those are some of the guys that I really, really enjoyed watching when I was younger.
So you brought up going to college. What did you end up going to college for, and how was the college experience for you?
I was a broadcast journalism major at USC, and part of it was, so as a kid, I wanted to be a writer. Like I thought I was going to write books and movies. Like my best friend and I were 13. We started writing a screenplay that I think I randomly found like in a trunk at my mom's house or something. I thought that's what I was going to do. And then I remember reading and hearing these stories about writers dying penniless and, insane and stuff. And I was like, well, that doesn't seem really all that exciting. So maybe journalism's sort of the way to go. So then I actually thought when I graduated high school, my career path was going to be more in just straight hard news. When I was a senior, like I was 17 or whatever, I thought, my career goal was going to be the anchor of the nightly news, right? I thought I was going to be, Dan Rather or Tom Brokaw or somebody like that. Then I get to college, and I mean, literally my first day, it's move-in day. I'm meeting new people. I meet these 2 guys. They're tossing a football around on the front lawn of the dorm. And they said to me like, hey, we're going over to meet the sports director of the student radio station. They're looking for people. You want to tag along and come with? And I was like, sure, why not? So I went over, we met the guy. He said, there's a meeting on Monday. Come join the staff. We'd love to have you. We'll find something for you guys to do. So I showed up on Monday. My first ever beat at SC was covering the women's soccer team at the time. But just kind of being around all those folks, right? And sitting around talking sports in the station, in the lounge. It was like, well, this is kind of what I did with my friends back home. And I'm like, why don't I make this my career? Why don't I just shift track and sort of be more sports oriented? So really it took me all of one day, not even a full 24 hours on a college campus to kind of change what my career goals were. But I loved it. I loved my 4 years at SC. I wish the football team was better when we were there. When I was there, we were mediocre at best during my 4 years there, but I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. I made a ton of friends that I still have. It definitely helps for my career path that, there's a large, what I would like to call the USC mafia sort of integrated in Los Angeles area sports media. So that has certainly been a big plus, but I absolutely enjoyed my 4 years there.
And so how did you start playing fantasy football?
My freshman year of college, actually. That same radio station, one of the guys on the staff who was a senior said he had a fantasy football league, asked if we wanted to be in it. They had one spot left in the league. And so there ended up being 3 of us, me and the 2 guys that I met tossing a football on the lawn. The 3 of us said, oh, we'll share it. We'll go in together on this. Thinking like, we didn't know anything about fantasy football, but like we know stuff about football, like that's good enough. So we all got together and we went and we did the draft. And so this was way back in the late 1900s. Our first draft pick was Dan Marino, which nowadays, if you tell somebody that, like, they're like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why was a quarterback your first pick? But back then, we really hadn't evolved fantasy draft theory or anything like that. Like, it was common to see quarterbacks taken in the first round because it was like, well, they score a lot of points, right? I mean, Dan Marino's going to throw the ball a lot and he's going to throw a lot of touchdowns. Like, why wouldn't we want him on our team? So we drafted Marino. I don't remember who else we really had on that team. It ended up being an average team. I don't even think we made the playoffs. It was just kind of a middle of the road team at best. But I always tell this to like younger people, like kids coming out of college and stuff like that. Like when I started playing fantasy, you had to really, really want it because the internet wasn't really a big thing. Like I think we had internet in our dorm, but it was still dial up and really, really slow. And fantasy leagues weren't on the internet at that point. So every week when we were calling in our lineup, we would literally call in the lineup. We would get on the phone and leave a message on the commissioner's answering machine with like, okay, Marino at quarterback, and this is our running back. These are our running backs and our wide receivers and blah, blah, blah. If we woke up on Sunday morning and somebody was a late scratch, we had to immediately get on the phone and say, okay, well, you got to take this person out and put this person back in. We wouldn't necessarily know who our opponent was starting on any given week because we didn't hear the messages that they left. On Monday and Tuesday, Monday we would take the LA Times and we'd go through the box scores and we would try to hand calculate our stats because the commissioner lived off campus, so he might not get us the updated stats packet sometimes until Wednesday or Thursday. Like if he didn't have to come to campus, he might fax it in to like the student radio station or the student newspaper. Or a lot of times he would call me in my dorm and be like, hey, I got the stats. And it was like a drug deal. Like I would run down to he'd be parked out in front of the dorm and I'd run down and he'd like roll down the window and he'd hand me a stat packet and I'd like pour over it and run back inside. You had to really, really want it to play fantasy back then. And so I laugh now when like the app glitches or whatever and somebody, I'll get tweets and stuff or somebody might mention like, hey, what happened to my Saquon touchdown? Like it happened 3 minutes ago and it doesn't update it yet. And I'm like, bro, calm down.
Yeah, right.
I had to wait 3-4 days for updated stats. Like you'll be fine. Like, but people of a certain age sort of remember this if you played fantasy, but a lot of people don't really, they don't know what it was like. It's my uphill to school both ways in the snow sort of story.
Okay, thank you. I was actually using that analogy earlier when I was talking about it because I've been talking to people lately who also went that route, had to, started so early that the internet wasn't really what it is now, obviously. Mm-hmm. And it's crazy to think how much it's grown and changed since you started playing to where it is now. Like, did you ever think that it'd be where it is now?
I mean, I didn't. And it's funny because even for years after that, I never really played fantasy competitively. I played mostly socially. It was a chance to kind of be social, even after the rise of the internet. I played in a league with guys from high school because it was a way for us to sort of keep in touch after we all, spread out across the state and across the country. I moved to a new city. I moved to Fresno at one point for a job and I didn't know anybody there. And so I had a coworker who invited me into his league and I'm like, well, this seems like a good way for me just to meet new people and make new friends in a place where I don't know a lot of folks. That's why I played fantasy. I wasn't really playing it to be, competitive and try to, win money and stuff like that. And so I never really considered it as an industry. I never considered it as something other than just kind of a fun, geeky little hobby to sort of occupy your mind while you're actually watching the games. And so looking back on it, it is amazing how it has exploded into this whole industry in and of itself. But no, I never really imagined this, but it just never seemed to be a thing that was serious enough that I would think that people would just gravitate toward. I've always said that this is Dungeons and Dragons for sports nerds. And I was a sports nerd, so it just seemed fitting that I would do this. So
how did you take the first step in your professional journey? What's the story? How did you get started?
It's funny. I always tell people that I didn't seek out this career. It just sort of found me. I had been working in radio for a long time in various forms. I did a couple of seasons of broadcasting minor league baseball. I worked for a couple of radio stations for a while. And I had a radio job in Los Angeles for a national network. And after about a year and a half of working there, the company sold, and the owner, who lived in Houston, wanted to move operations to Houston. And, they offered me a chance to go there, and I thought about it, but I want to stay in Los Angeles. I'm from California. My sister is here in Southern California. My folks are in Northern California, so I didn't really want to leave. So I said thanks, but no thanks. I'll figure something out here in LA. And at the time, one of my former coworkers at the radio station, he had been working seasonally at the NFL, just kind of doing stuff part-time or whatever. And he reached out to me and he's like, hey, look, if you're looking for a job, go apply at the NFL. He's like, they're always looking for people in season. Just give them a shot. And so when I tell you, I literally went to like NFL.com/jobs or whatever the website is. I went and just started going through the list of openings and applying to a bunch of things, many of which I was not qualified for. But at the time, I was just, I was working freelance, just kind of sitting on my couch and, watching reruns of Law and Order SVU and, smoking weed every day. Like that was kind of my life for about a year, trying to figure out what to do next. I should also mention that this was in 2011. And at the time, the NFL was in a lockout. The owners had locked the players out. They were trying to figure out the CBA. And there was, some chatter about whether there was going to be a season. People were really concerned that there might not be an NFL season that year. So I applied for about 5 or 6 jobs. Nothing happened. I honestly had kind of forgotten about it because so much time had passed. I get a phone call from somebody at the network asking if I wanted to apply or wanted to interview for a job writing about fantasy football. And I was like, well, does it pay? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, sure. So I went in, I did the interview. A couple weeks later, I wake up in the morning and I turned on ESPN, turned on Sports Center, and there's like a big story. Like the lockout is over. The two sides have come to an agreement. Lockout's over. There's going to be an NFL season. A couple hours after I saw that, I get a phone call telling me I had been hired for the gig. And that first year or so, I was a seasonal employee for the first 2 seasons that I worked there. So I started in August. I would work from August till like March. And then they would send me out into the wilderness for 5 months. I would just, go figure out what to do to, make ends meet and pay rent for 5 months. I was kind of a glorified copy editor. I would read and write a lot of copy. I was able to do some blog posts. Every once in a while, they would let me do a little cameo spot on their podcast. I think once got to be on TV, which thankfully for me, it was pre-taped because it went. It wasn't great. Let's say that. Like I was supposed to talk about a player and I just completely blanked when it came to me. I'm like, who am I supposed to be talking about? And I just went silent. So we had to like stop and restart and everything. But yeah, so that was, that's how it started. And now here I am. Fortunately, it'll be 13 years in August that I will have been with NFL media.
That is so awesome. You don't hear about people's careers last, with one place for that long. So that's really super dope. And putting out content, especially with something like the NFL being such a brand, everybody knows the NFL, even if they don't know the NFL. So,
Right.
But being there and just kind of getting started, getting in front of the camera or recording a podcast or doing any of that stuff, how did you get more comfortable behind the camera or behind the microphone?
I definitely think, having that time in radio certainly helped, right? But it goes back to, even doing college radio, because I think the first step to getting comfortable is getting comfortable listening to yourself over again. And I think every single person goes through this where you record something, you listen to it back, you have it played back for you, and your first thought is like, oh my God, do I really sound like that? Like, oh. And it was just sort of getting used to the sound of your own voice. And I did that because, going to school in LA, living in the Bay Area, I would, especially on breaks and at the end of the year, I would drive my little tiny beat up car home. And so at some point I'm like, well, I'm going to be in this car for 6 hours. I'm kind of a captive audience. I'm just going to pop this tape in and I'm going to force myself to listen to it as I drive. And then after a little while, you sort of get used to the sound of your own voice. And then you can start to sort of analyze what you're saying and how you're saying it. And so I think that's kind of the first step to getting more comfortable. Beyond that, it really is just reps. It's just doing it over and over again and feeling more comfortable and starting to, realize that you don't want to talk at people. You just want to talk to people, like you're talking, like you're having a conversation, like you and I are right now. And so it's like little things, like, imagining you're talking to just a friend, that you're talking to one or two people as opposed to a whole wide audience. And so I think it's just little things like that. I've been fortunate in my career to have really great mentors in a lot of different areas. I had a guy who I still keep in touch with, who was great in terms of helping me with sports radio and building rundowns and how to format a show and how to do play-by-play. Like, he was great at those sorts of things and really gave me a lot of tips. I had a guy, my first ever job in radio, I worked for an NPR station and would read the announcements between shows. I like the next show would come on. I'd be like, you listening to Fresh Air on 89.9 KCRW. Stay tuned. All Things Considered is coming up next. Stuff like that. I remember with him, he told me after the first couple of weeks I worked there, he's like, you're a really nice kid. It sounds like you know what you're doing. The problem is you sound like you're 22. And I'm like, well, I am 22. His advice to me was whiskey and cigars. Do something to, get your throat a little more rough. The cigars didn't stick. The whiskey part did. But yeah, it's just, I've been fortunate to have some really great mentors who've given me some great advice. Other than that, it's sort of listening to people that I think are good at what they do. And kind of taking little bits from them here and there, and then just being fortunate to have the chance to do it over and over and over again.
In consuming content, when you're taking in content, whether that's fantasy content or if it's just anything, when you're trying to be entertained, what are you looking for in the type of content that you like to consume?
I definitely want somebody who, can, in terms of like a show, like a podcast or something like that, I think there's value in being able to sort of keep it moving, but at the same time, know when it's okay to pause and linger on something, right? Like, sometimes things are funny, or maybe they need to go more in depth. And so it's sort of that knowledge of, hey, this is a spot where we can stop and we can kind of dive in a little bit more. This is a thing that maybe isn't quite as important, doesn't need as much time. We can just sort of move on there, but being able to go and have fun with it. I think a thing that works for any format, any podcast, TV show, whatever, it's when you get the sense that the people there actually like each other, when they are actually all friends, when you can imagine that they all hang out in real life. And I think sometimes you peel back the curtain and you realize that maybe this group of people doesn't really actually like each other, but at least they put up a good front on TV or on a podcast. And I think that goes a really, really long way. But like everybody else, man, I want to laugh every now and then. I want to maybe learn something every now and then. I want to be able to think. All those things are important. And I think if you can sort of figure out how to blend all of them, if you can make me laugh while teaching me something all at the same time, then, that's a double thumbs up there.
When you first started putting out content and doing all of that kind of stuff, what's something that you wish that you would have known earlier, like would have made life a whole lot easier if you would have just done it when you started?
I think I think the biggest thing is when you're doing, especially when you're doing live radio, podcasts are a little bit different, but I think when you're doing stuff live, it's to realize that once you've said it, it's sort of gone. As long as you don't say anything like really, galactically, stupid or offensive or something like that. But if you just make like a little glitch or you say something slightly wrong, don't dwell on it because it's already out in the atmosphere and there's no getting those words back. If you're Tom Brenneman and you're making horrible slurs that get caught over the air, then those are things that are going to haunt you, and we're never going to hear from probably never going to hear from him again in a broadcast space. But I think sometimes you feel like you have to be perfect when you're speaking, and you don't, because when you do things when you're talking for a living, you are inevitably going to slip up. You're going to stumble over a word. You're going to misspeak somewhere. And it's just at some point you just learn to kind of let it go. Now, you always try to get better from those kinds of things. You're trying to learn how to improve upon what you're doing. But I think early on, like I would make a mistake and I would just sort of like hang on it and I would think about it and like it would be over, the show would be over and I would just, dwell on it in my head. Nowadays, like I say something that's a little bit weird and maybe I acknowledge it. But like when the show's over, the show's kind of over, and you just kind of take from it. You try to get better the next time.
And then how do you balance like the work-life ratio? How do you make sure that you don't burn out and make sure that, you spend the time where you need to spend the time?
Yeah, you know what I've learned after all this time, especially in the off season, is to just let off the gas. I know people like to say all gas, no brakes. I guess in the off season, I'm still no brakes, but I'm on a whole hell of a lot less gas with it. Because especially in season, between the NFL Network, and I've been fortunate the last few years to work over at Fantasy Life with Matthew Berry and that amazing team over there. I have learned, I know that from basically August to January, it is all go and it is an absolute grind. So I've kind of learned that, this time of year, I know to back off a little bit. We still do pods on both those platforms. I write occasional things. I do a little bit of video content, but not to the level of what I do in season, because I just know that by the time I get to like week 14 or 15, like you're starting to look for the end of the tunnel, right? You're starting to look for the finish line and it starts to become a grind and it starts to kind of wear you down a little bit. So I've just kind of learned how to do that. I tell people now that at this point in my career, I'm like the, 8 or 10 year NFL veteran who knows his body just well enough to stay in shape for the off season and how to get ready in training camp, as opposed to, being the guy who's just finished his rookie year or second year and like you are all go and you're working out hard and you're trying to grind and make sure you're in the best shape of your life. I'm too old, man. I can't do that anymore. I got a kid. Like and so it's like I do enjoy this time of year of being more of a dad and being able to pick my kid up and drop him off and spend more time with him, and like on weekends being able to like take him to the zoo or something like that. I think it's a thing that sort of comes with age and time and doing this a lot. But it is definitely a thing that I tell content creators who are maybe newer to the space. It's like, hey, don't grind yourself into dust. If you're going to go through the whole season, you're going to be doing content. It's okay to pause for a couple weeks or something after the season. That prospect film is still going to be there when you come back. All those spreadsheets, all those, analytics, models that you're working on, they will still be there when you come back. There's only so long that you can just kind of grind consistently without just burning yourself out, no matter how much you love it.
Yeah, for sure. And this podcast is one that looks to help people that want to get into the fantasy football industry or want to get started putting out content and all of that. For brand new content creators, people that used to consume and now they want to put out content, what kind of advice would you give a brand new person who is kind of just starting from scratch?
Be consistent in terms of, in a lot of ways, be consistent, obviously, in terms of how much you're putting out or when you're putting out content. And for me, that doesn't necessarily mean every day. If you decide you can do it twice a week or 3 times a week, consistently do it twice a week or 3 times a week. Just something so that people sort of know when to look out for what you're doing. But also be consistent in sort of how you present yourself. And that sort of means trying to be you as much as possible. I know, especially the way the algorithm is now on like Twitter and stuff, like, people sort of get rewarded for doing clickbaity or engagement farming sort of things, and I know that's kind of an easy way to suddenly build numbers and especially if you subscribe to Twitter Blue, it's a way to maybe make lunch money. I know it's not a lot of money that folks are making with the blue checks, but it's a way to get a little bit of cash, and I'm not going to frown on that. But try to do it in a way that's authentic. because I think people can sort of see through engagement farming, and maybe it works for a little while, but I think it eventually it turns people off. So I think there's just something to that consistency, and I think being within the community here in the fantasy community, engaging with other people, but doing it in good faith, like being sincere and honest about it. I wouldn't necessarily go when you see a tweet, immediately spamming it with your own content. Like actually go out and have a conversation with other people. And I think along the way, those folks will start checking for you. I mean, I think a lot of the people whose content that I consume now are people that, either they came to me and we just had a conversation and I just sort of organically started kind of following and connecting with them or what have you, stuff like that. But the people who just kind of pop in and are sort of using you for like an advice ATM, it sort of shows like I'm a person. I have feelings. I want to talk about things. I want to talk about other things besides football. Like, I think just engaging with people on a human level goes a long way toward getting your content noticed. And I think once you get your content noticed, then you can sort of open up and start to ask and push for more from there.
Hey everyone, Kacey Kasem here. I want to take a moment to tell you about Sunday Dreamers Club, my fantasy football inspired t-shirt store. If you're looking for unique, stylish, and comfortable apparel that showcases your love for fantasy football, look no further than sundaydreamersclub.com. Whether you're gearing up for the next big game, hosting a draft party, or just want to sport some awesome gear, Sunday Dreamers Club has got you covered. With a variety of designs and styles to choose from, there's something for every fantasy football fan out there. Your support means the world to me, and there are so many ways you can help me grow this new small business. Grab a shirt or two for yourself or as a gift for your fantasy football league mates, or you can spread the word to your friends and family. Every bit helps, and I truly appreciate your support. Thanks for listening, and now let's get back to the show. The community, the fantasy football community, is really, really huge. I mean, it's not like, I don't know, it's probably like a little speck in the big, in the giant journey of it all. But I saw you at the Fantasy Football Expo, so I know that you're out engaging with your audience and, making those connections with them. How important is it to show respect to your audience and to give them, let them know that you care about them,
Yeah, I think it goes a long way. I mean, it really, really does. It's funny because I have seen this thing grow so much. And you talk about the size of the fantasy community. I mean, as long as I've been doing this, it is amazing that I could probably go on Twitter every single day and probably learn about someone I've never heard of before doing content. Like that is how much this thing continues to expand. But yeah, I think definitely connecting with the audience and giving them the sense that, hey man, like I'm one of you, I play fantasy too. I think honestly, I think the biggest thing that helps connect with the audience is sort of admitting to your swings and misses. Like it's fine to definitely pat yourself on the back and take the victory lap about the things you got right. But I feel like I get the most honest, sincere engagement when I talk about the things that I got wrong, and especially if it's something that I did too in my own lineup, right? If it's a player that I thought was going to have a big, big week and I started him and he falls on his face, or a guy that I thought like, I don't love the matchup, I'm going to try to avoid him. And, he ends up going off on my bench. I think those sorts of things, humanize you and, like you're not just some stat geek or film geek or analytics geek or whatever, and you're up here preaching from on high about you should do this with your lineup. I think those sorts of things really go a long way. And I will say this, going to the expo has been amazing, in part because, the first time it was about meeting a lot of people who I had only known from the internet. Like, people who previously to me had just been an avatar on Twitter. And I'm like, oh, well, you have like legs and feet. You're not just a torso and a head. That part was very, very cool. And then I've been fortunate to just meet a whole lot of other new people whom I may not have known at all. And just seeing sort of that camaraderie there has been amazing, to the point that I started calling the expo, it's like fantasy football Coachella. I mean, it's a party for a few days and everybody's having a great time and everybody is super cool and chill. Like I haven't had a bad interaction the whole time I've been there. So I'm looking forward to August. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. It has been very, very cool to connect with people like on a human level at this point.
I'll be talking to people on this show and they'll be like, man, and even the big name guys like Marcas Grant will come up to you and know who you are. And I'm like, yeah, it is kind of crazy. Like I was interviewing Rachel Tootsie Pop for the
Yeah.
very first time. Like she had ever been on a podcast, and she had brought up that you knew who she was, and she was all excited about that. And I said, I need to get Marcas on the show, and I'm so glad that that worked out. So how about with the NFL draft coming up? How is that time for you with content creation, with just, the various channels that you're putting content out and working with?
Yeah, it is one of the busier times, at least of the off season, I should say. I think there are a couple of big busy spots for us, at least for me personally. Free agency is a big time when you have a whole lot of, especially a year like this where you had so many guys, all these running backs going from one place to another. Free agency is a big time. The draft is another big time. I've sort of learned the spots that at least I think are more relevant for fantasy. I mean, I know people love the combine and they love watching guys run the 40 and all the drills and stuff like that. And I think for certain people that is a big deal. I think for me personally in fantasy, like it's all cool and fun to watch. I don't know that it's as important until you find a landing spot for a guy. Like I think you can watch guys have great combines and be super, super athletic. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba, for instance, comes to mind, right? Everybody talked about how great he was. And he was. He had a great college career and worked out well and tested well. And then he goes to a team where they have two really good established veteran receivers. And just naturally because of that, his production was sort of stifled as a rookie. And so I think, meanwhile you get some guys, Rashee Rice, right, who wasn't necessarily highly regarded, at least not as much as JSN. He goes to Kansas City. They don't have Tyreek Hill. He gets a whole lot of opportunity because he's got the best quarterback in the game throwing him the football. And so all our talk about athletic testing and colleges and matchups and all this kind of stuff sort of went out the window because of the landing spot those guys are in. So free agency is great because you get a sense of how some of these guys are going to slot in immediately with their new teams. The draft is sort of the next big thing because now we have a bigger picture and a more complete look at how rosters are going to go. And we can figure out hey man, if the Bills draft a wide receiver, that guy in the first round, that guy's probably going to get a lot of opportunity because they need somebody for Josh Allen to throw the football to. So this is an interesting time because, it's fun to talk to people, especially the draft nicks, the scouts, the people who are really kind of watching these guys and getting their feeling on it. But one of the things I always ask is how many guys do you think are going to go in the first round? What are some good landing spots? Because I think that for fantasy is more relevant than saying what makes Marvin Harrison better than Malik Neighbors. I think that's a interesting conversation from a very technical, nuanced standpoint. But if Marvin Harrison goes to the New England Patriots and they don't have a quarterback, and Malik Neighbors goes to Arizona where Kyler Murray is there, I think we're going to be more excited about Neighbors than we are Harrison for fantasy.
A time in a time in history that we all had to deal with was the pandemic. So during that time, I'm sure that things were a lot different for you than from your normal day to day, putting out content, working and doing all of that. How was that time period for you when you were doing that?
It was rough. I'm just going to be honest. It was rough on a lot of levels because, first, just on a personal level, my wife and I our son, when the world shut down, it was 2 weeks before my kid's first birthday, which sort of sucked. He'll never remember it because he wasn't even 1 year old yet. But, we had a birthday party planned for him for his first year. We had grandparents coming in from out of town. We were really focusing on that. Then all of a sudden, the whole world shuts down and we have to cancel it. He ended up having his first birthday on Zoom, like a lot of people. I had my birthday on Zoom that year. And so, in that respect, it was hard because we were in a small 2-bedroom apartment with an infant. and we couldn't leave the house. And so like I'm trying to do podcasts because the network, we're still rolling on, right? We're still doing pods. We're still doing, live hits on the network. And so I would try to do these like live hits from my son's bedroom. And it'd be the middle of the day, and sometimes it would coincide with nap time. But like I'm sitting here with like a folding TV tray and some books and a laptop stacked on top of it, and I'm like just asking my wife, like, I need 20 minutes. Please just give me 20 minutes. And the kid is cranky and he's tired and he wants to take a nap, and I'm trying to do stuff on the network real quick. So it was hard. It was frustrating. It was exhausting. But you did learn a lot more. You had to learn how to be your own engineer, your own your own lighting crew, your own makeup crew. When we finally got back into the studio, I remember talking to the people in hair and makeup, and they were like, "Yeah, we were so worried. Like, you don't have to worry about me taking your job because I was terrible at doing it. Like, I was never gonna I was no threat to like taking your job doing hair and makeup or whatever. I feel good that I at least was technically competent enough that I could set up my own equipment and everything like that, because I know that not everybody was good at that. And I think the biggest thing about the pandemic is it really leveled the playing field in terms of the professionals versus, I won't say amateurs, but the people who had been doing stuff from home for years, right? Like for people who had been podcasting and streaming from home, they already had their setups and they already knew how to get things done and on the air and online and that sort of thing. The people who had been doing it professionally in studio, you didn't have to worry about that. You showed up, somebody put a microphone on you, somebody else handled the lights and the cameras and the sound and all that kind of stuff. And you just, when they turned the camera on and pointed it at you, you just went. So, I know there were, some of the other talent, some of the former players who were like trying to set up their webcams, and like you could hear them like calling for their kids to like help because I don't know how to get this thing going. Like, what's going on here? So it definitely sort of leveled the playing field. And I think for a lot of people who were doing stuff from home, they got a leg up on a lot of the networks who were struggling to kind of figure out what life was going to be. I don't miss it. I enjoy being able to go back outside and circulate amongst the population again, but it definitely was a learning experience for a lot of us.
Yeah, it was a big, and I know that there was like a big explosion of content being created during that time too, because we were all at home being bored. We didn't have anything to do. Yes. Yeah, that's definitely what happened with me. And I was like, you know what? I'm glad that I'm not glad that COVID happened. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. But I am glad that I started putting out content. So it has been a good time in this space. With fantasy football, I just want to kind of talk about leagues and your kind of style of playing. What's your favorite type of fantasy football to play?
I'm basic. I like is a good sort of standard one quarterback, redraft league. Like I'm really just kind of basic like that. I sort of like being able to hit the reset button at the end of the season. I love you Dynasty folks, but like you guys, the Dynasty folks, for lack of a better term, are sort of nocturnal. Like the point in the year when everybody else is sort of going dormant is when they come to life. When the season's over and everybody else has kind of like put it away for the year, then that's when like the Dynasty folks start sending out trade offers and doing rankings and stuff like that. I respect it. Like I don't necessarily want to play it all year long. I play in Dynasty leagues, but it's I am just like a basic, generic, like one quarterback. I've sort of accepted PPR in some form at this point because it has become the way of the world. Look, I think the beauty of it is that for however many people there are playing, there are that many different versions and that many ways you can tweak your scoring systems, your rosters, your lineups, all that kind of stuff. I think that's the beauty of it. But yeah, I will say that I'm pretty much a basic B when it comes to my fantasy life.
You know what? That is great. And that is great. So are you one of those people that knows how many leagues you're in and all of that fun stuff? Are you in a bunch?
I do. It's funny because I am in enough leagues that for the average casual player, it's like, holy crap, that's a lot of leagues. But amongst like people who are analysts and who do this, you're like, oh, that's it? Like I think I was in this year, and mind you, I cut the number down. I had cut it to, I think, 13 this year.
Okay.
A handful of them were best ball leagues. So again, that was like, I drafted them and I would check in on them, but there wasn't a lot necessarily to do with them. And a good number of them were sort of industry related leagues. I had, my home league was just my friends from high school. I had another league with some other friends or whatever. But most of them, like I said, are either best ball leagues or industry related leagues. And that's enough. To have to do waivers and to, kind of negotiate trades and set lineups for all of these while doing all the other things that, I have to do just in work and in life. That was plenty. So, so again, like, it's one of those things where, like, I talk to people who aren't in this industry and I say, I was in 13 leagues, and their minds are blown. Like, how do you do that? And then I talk to people who are in the industry and I'm like, I'm in 13 leagues. They're like, really? That's it? So yeah, I think it depends on perspective.
For sure. I tell people how many leagues around here, I'm like telling my friends, how do you have time for that? Don't you do this? Don't you do that too? And I'm like, never mind. I'm not in that many, so it's not even like I say that, but it's not. I finally got it to a nice spot where I feel comfortable with the amount of leagues I'm in, and most of them have the same settings, so I don't have to worry about going in there.
Right.
Have you played any other fantasy sports besides fantasy football?
I used to do baseball, which, fantasy football obviously is the dominant thing. But, once upon a time, it was all about what then was called rotisserie baseball. Now is fantasy baseball. I mean, that was sort of the first thing, I think, in the entry of fantasy sports. And so, like, I did that for a long time. What changed was basically getting this job. It was that... I would sign up for a league and I do a draft, and like in April and May and like even through June, like I was on top of it and I was able to set lineups and I was really checking everything. It was great. And then, training camp would open and, my whole focus would be on football. And so it got harder for me to keep up with my fantasy baseball team. And so because of that, I just had to learn to sort of, kind of let go and kind of retire from fantasy baseball. I may have done basketball once or twice too, but I don't remember ever being really super into fantasy basketball like that.
Yeah, I played fantasy baseball for a little bit and quickly was like, yeah, I don't have time.
Right. I mean, it's a lot, especially like the leagues that are daily. Like some weeks are sort of, or leagues are weekly, and you can kind of set them and maybe you check them here or there. But yeah, the leagues that are daily where like, we had guys who would like churn their entire pitching staffs every single day. And I'm like, I don't have that kind of time. I don't have that kind of interest in doing that sort of thing. Yeah.
Have you done live drafts, in-person drafts with draft boards and all that fun stuff? Because I like to talk to people about that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I've done them. I mean, I played in leagues where like that was it, and it was great because it was like your social. That was the big social experience, right? When I mentioned, when I moved to Fresno and I had a coworker invite me to his league, like that league we would get together at a pizza place. We ordered several pizzas, a couple pitchers of beer. And we would do the live draft where like, you get up, you pick the sticker, you put the sticker on the board and everybody, waits with bated breath to see what name you're going to put up there. And then they adjust and they keep going. So, I think that's a sort of a thing that I kind of miss because now it's like, you play and you do it on the internet and you're on your phone, you're on your computer. I mean, I feel like the last few years, not only am I not drafting in person, but like when drafts are happening, I can't remember the last time I sat down and was just able to sit down and have the draft be the thing that I focus on, right? Like nowadays when the drafts are happening, I'm doing dad stuff. I'm cooking dinner. We might be out somewhere. And so I'm like trying to sneak a peek on my phone and like, see when my turn's coming up and make the pick. It feels very, very rare nowadays when I get to just sit down and just straight up draft, honestly.
And I like to talk to people about the Scott Fish Bowl as well. I don't know if I mean, I do know, but I'm going to pretend I don't. Have you participated in that or what's that
I have. I have. It's fun. I mean, like, here's the thing. For me, like the best part of the Scott Fish Bowl is the draft. Maybe because I haven't never really done really well once the league starts. It's funny because like the draft happens, And like I draft this team, like it's usually June when the drafts happen. So I draft the team in June, and like you're kind of excited about it. And then I get to September, and I look back at it, and I'm like, what the hell was I doing? Like this is awful. Last year, actually, I think I had one of my best years. Right, I almost made the playoffs. I will admit that I have never really done well at the Scott Fish Bowl, but I enjoy it. I think it's so much fun because everybody is tweeting about it. Everybody is posting their picks and posting their rosters, and it kind of feels like Christmas or whatever. So, that part of it is fun. But I will admit that I have not been really great at the week to week, winning and losing of it.
It's all right. Like I'm the same exact way. I'm the same exact way. And then we did like the live draft last year in Dallas, and I was running that. So I'm trying to draft and run this live draft. Yeah, I'm not doing that again this year. Run it and then
That
go
sounds
down
rough.
to Houston, for that draft. So. Okay. So what do you like to do when you have free time? I know sometimes that's hard to come by, but when you do have free time, what do you like to do?
I enjoy cooking. I am kind of the cook at home. I do most of the meals here, so I enjoy that. Thanks to my mother, have sort of gotten into gardening a little bit. A little vegetables, some herbs, stuff like that. Just a little few things to plant in our small backyard. Because it's just one, it's sort of calming. It's nice to be outside and sort of working in the dirt a little bit, and it's just something rewarding about watching something you planted kind of grow and then turning that into a meal. A few years ago I had cucumbers, and being able to grow cucumbers and chop them up and put them in a salad. Now I have strawberries and growing all sorts of little things, and it feels rewarding. It feels sort of like contributing to the circle of life a little bit. So I'm definitely into that. I have become a comic book nerd. I will admit, I came to comic books a little bit later in life. Like I was a full grown ass man when I started reading comic books. But I have kind of become a comic book nerd. I've always been a Spider-Man fan, even as a kid. But in terms of sort of branching out into the wider graphic novel universe, that came to me as an adult. Beyond that, I mean, I guess my other big hobby is my kid. He just turned 5. And, it's great to sort of watch him grow up and to see things sort of develop, right? As the light comes on and something else clicks as he gets a little bit older and develops. So that part is really, really fun. And me sort of being able to kind of imprint things on him. Like one of my proudest days as a dad is when I was like, hey, what do you want to watch on TV? And he said, let's watch Spidey. And I'm like, yes. Yeah. My job as a parent is done. So I mean that's pretty much where all my free time goes nowadays.
That's awesome. Yeah. I don't have any kids, but I can just imagine like growing up with him, watching him grow and the fact that he had to celebrate his birthday during COVID and all that stuff, just I can't imagine being a kid during that time. So.
Yeah, and I'm so fortunate, at least I feel grateful for his sake, that it happened during a period that he's not going to remember and at a time that he doesn't really truly understand. I think the frustrating part for me and for my wife was, at that point, we would take him to a park near our apartment just so we can get outside,
Mm-hmm.
But you'd have other families, other parents there, and everybody's trying to keep their distance. And so I always felt bad when he would want to go toward other kids and play. We're like, no, stay away. So I don't know, I don't know if what long-term effect that's going to have on him. It's nothing that he could say and tell us at that point in his life, and he's not going to remember it. So I don't know what long-term effect it's going to have. But I'm really grateful that I feel bad for people who had kids who were a little bit older.
Mm-hmm.
I think especially for having teenagers or something like that, where you really were separated from your social circle and your friends. I couldn't imagine being 13 or 14 and being stuck in the house with my parents all the time. Like that feels miserable for the kid. It feels miserable for the parents. So I guess if there's a silver lining, that would be it for me.
So touching back on being a comic book nerd and superheroes and all of that, I'll ask a kind of basic question, but if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
I'd say invisibility, but mostly so that I could just hide and be left alone. like I don't have any really like nefarious evil plans or anything like that with my invisibility power. It's just that like, I would just not be there. Like that's it. Like I just want to be left alone. That's the superpower that I would want the most. Because I feel like, anything else, like if you could fly, if you had super strength, if you had super speed, I feel like what's going to happen is that people are just going to ask you to help them move. Like that's going to be the worst,
Yeah.
right? Like, like it's like I love you, but I don't want to help you move your stuff. And like if you have strength or speed or anything like that, like having a truck in real life is a superpower because people ask you to like help them move and stuff like that. And I love you, but I don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that. Definitely. It's the worst. It's the worst.
Moving sucks,
Oh
man.
my God. My wife's always like, why don't you want to move? Your family doesn't live here anymore and most of your friends are gone and this, that, and the other. Because moving
Moving
sucks.
sucks,
We did
man.
that right before the pandemic hit. So like December 2019, we moved
Yeah.
and then like immediately had to be stuck in this house with like all the boxes and everything.
Yeah, we moved during the pandemic actually. 'Cause we
Oh,
had that
dang.
2-bedroom apartment and we ended up moving to a larger apartment in the same building. Which, was a little bit nerve-wracking. One, because moving is awful, but then on top of it, it's like, you're worried, like you're making sure that the movers have masks and we have masks and like making sure everything is ventilated and just like, it just was not, moving is always bad. This was even more bad than most opportunities.
Oh, well, okay, let me ask you about your football watching and how that goes. If I was to sit down with you, or just like if the listener was to sit down with you during, football season, football's on, how is it like for you? Are you loud? Are you quiet?
I, for the most part, tend to be quiet. And it depends, right? Like being a 49ers fan, when they're playing big games, I can get a little more emotional about it. But I think part of what it is doing this for so many years is that you stop being, at least for me, I stopped being really partial to teams, and maybe you sort of are more partial to players and that sort of thing. So like I watch the 49ers. I get, like I'm still heartbroken about the Super Bowl. Like I thought I was over the Super Bowl. I really did. And then I turned on TV and it was like one of those like Sports Illustrated, like the Chiefs are Super Bowl champions. And I was just like, and I turned off the TV. It was just
like, nope, can't do it.
Can't do it. But generally, like I think I've become more a fan of players than teams specifically. So, I tend to just kind of be kind of chill when I'm watching football for the most part.
So do you have any favorite players right now?
I like Patrick Mahomes. I know that I know the Chiefs have kind of become the evil empire, but I just think they're fun to watch, man. Like I think he's a fun player to watch. I mean, it was Frank Gore for a long time, and I really thought he was going to play until the sun exploded. But sadly, like for all of us, Father Time came for him. I don't know. Like, Joe Burrow, I think is very cool, is very fun to watch. I don't know that I really have a current favorite player at the moment.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of this question, which is how often do you get told that your voice is really nice for media like this, podcast?
Every once in a while. Every once in a while, somebody does. Usually it's when, like they find out, that I worked in radio. It's like oh yeah, I can hear that. That sounds really good on radio. I'm like, oh, thank you. I get that every once in a while.
And also, do your friends come to you for fantasy football advice since they know what your career is?
Some, obviously not for. It's funny, when I got this job, I got invited to way more fantasy leagues. People are like, oh, now we got to play against the guy from the NFL. But I do. I get some folks who are like hitting me up, usually around draft time. Every once in a while they'll ask me like a weekly lineup decision, but most often it's like, hey man, I got this draft coming up, like, I got the 7th pick or whatever it is. What should I do? Or who are some options there? I am more likely to respond when it's a friend that I talk to on a semi-regular basis. I have those people who just pop up out of nowhere in like August and ask me a couple of draft questions, and then I won't hear from them again for a year. So sometimes they get left on red a little bit longer.
Are you one of those people in your leagues that's a good trash talker, or do you sit back and just kind of?
I'm kind of quiet. Like I sometimes I feel bad because like I'll end up in either these charity leagues or these like these pros versus Joes kind of leagues, and I think people like are excited to play and they see my name and they want to play and like they're excited to get in the league with me, and I sort of feel bad because I am not a trash talker, especially not with people that I don't really know. Like
Right.
maybe with like close friends, I'll talk a little bit more trash. With people I don't really know, I tend to be just kind of quiet and kind of keep to myself and not really active on the message board. So I sometimes I feel like I'm disappointing people because they have this like vision of playing against Marcas Grant from the NFL, and the reality is probably a lot less exciting than it is in their head.
Okay, jumping around just a little bit too, because you had brought up cooking, and do you have a favorite like tailgate meal? What would you, if you had like an ultimate tailgate, what would you want to have
Ooh.
there?
Um, I definitely want gotta get out of the basics, right? Like hot dogs and hamburger. Actually, not even hot dogs, brats. A good brat. That beforehand you boil them in like butter, beer, and onions, and then you throw them on the grill. Those are fantastic. I love. I went to a tailgate once in Seattle. For the Seahawks game, and these people from Alaska, they flew down from Alaska and they brought like Alaskan king crab, and like that was amazing. I went somewhere where somebody had like a lamb on a spit and stuff
Wow.
like that. Like I'm down to get creative with tailgate meals for sure.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody about how I don't think I've ever actually gone to a legit tailgate. So like that's something that I want to do sometime soon. Do you have anything that you look forward to maybe doing in the future that you haven't had the opportunity to do yet?
Um, like in football or just in general?
Just in general.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to write a comic book. I'd love to write a TV show or a movie. I worked in baseball for a while. I'd like to get back to it. Maybe not on a full-time basis, but maybe just a little bit doing some baseball stuff here and there. Football has been really, really good to me for the last 13 years. But I don't necessarily want to have that be my whole career where I'm just like talking about football like all the time. So I just being able to kind of branch out, do some different things that really appeals to me. Other than that, like, if I could travel more, stuff like that, that would be great.
Yeah, traveling is like one of those things that I wish I could do more of. Do you have a favorite place that you've traveled to?
Probably Rio. Rio
Oh,
de Janeiro was amazing. I went to Brazil for my 30th birthday. It was my birthday present to myself when I turned 30, and I spent like 2.5 weeks just kind of traveling Brazil by myself. And Rio was absolutely incredible. Would 100% do it. 10 out of 10 would go again. I know the NFL is playing in Sao Paulo, which I went to Sao Paulo. Like, it was fine. It's really, really big. Like, it's just hard to sort of find your way around it because it's so big. But Rio was kind of the perfect size. Where else have I been that I really loved? Edinburgh, Scotland was actually kind of cool because it's big enough to be like a kind of big city, but it's small enough that it's not overwhelming, right? It's not London or New York or Sao Paulo or something like that. So that was a pretty cool spot too.
and is there any place that you can think of that you'd like to go travel that you haven't been to yet?
Yeah, I mean, look, I still want to explore parts of South America. Like I said, I went to Brazil. I would love to go to like Argentina. I'd love to go to Africa. My sister went on safari in Africa a couple of years ago. Yeah, I did my Brazil trip for my 30th birthday. She went to South Africa for her 40th birthday.
Oh,
So like, and she went on safari. She said it was an absolutely amazing experience. So I would love to go to Africa at some point.
yeah, we were there in December. We went to Zimbabwe in December. So
Hmm.
that was incredible. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, definitely would
yeah,
suggest that if anybody gets a chance to go to Africa. Like, I know
I
it's expensive and
right,
it's a long ass flight
right.
with a nice layover and everything. So yeah, but totally fun. Okay, well, before we go, I just wanted to first and foremost thank you again for coming
Mhm.
on the show. Like, Marcus, this means a lot to me for real. And I'm sure that everybody listening is really excited that you were able to join as well. So thank you, thank you. But yeah, before we go, can you just let everybody know once again, like where they can find your stuff
Yeah.
and what you got going on.
Sure. Most of the best way to find a lot of my stuff is on Twitter at Marcas G, Marcasg. It's CAS. My parents have doomed me to a life of misspelled mail because it's spelled a little bit different.
Me too.
But Twitter's where you can find it. But I do work for a little mom and pop operation called the National Football League. We've got our NFL fantasy football podcast that comes out once a week in the off season, wherever you find podcasts. We've recently started our own streaming thing, which we do on Thursdays, called the NFL Fantasy Cheat Sheet. It's myself, Michael F. Florio, Laquan Jones. We do a little about 25 or 30 minutes of streaming every week, kind of talking about fantasy and other random things. And still working over at Fantasy Life. Every week I do a show with a really, really smart guy named Dwayne McFarland, who, and I tell this to everybody who asks and half the people who don't even ask, he makes me smarter about this job every time I talk to him. It has been one of the highlights of my career, being able to do that show with Dwayne. It's been absolutely amazing. Working with Matthew Berry has been absolutely incredible. So yeah, I'm doing all that. And then for those of you who want to hear me not do football stuff, I do a little part-time radio in Los Angeles. I get to do a little streaming show about the Dodgers, which is sort of one of my passions, watching Dodger baseball. So you can check me out on the Blue Review. But like I said, Twitter, Marcas G is kind of the clearinghouse to find all these things there.
Excellent. Yeah, go check out all of Marcus's stuff. And he brought up a lot of really awesome people's names as well. So shout out to them.
Yeah.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to this podcast, because it means so much to me. Like anytime somebody reaches out to me and says that, like, I just listened to this episode and, bring something up from it. It just, that's the best thing. That's the best thing ever. So thank you, everybody. And make sure that you come back next week for another episode of Get Real with Kacey Kasem. And remember to stay rad.
Get real. Time to get real, everybody.